breaking developments out of the United Kingdom are raising serious concern not only in Westminster but also in Washington, the Pentagon, and across the broader Western security community, as what critics are calling one of the most reckless foreign policy moves in modern British history begins to take shape. The UK government is moving toward transferring the Chagos Islands, a British overseas territory, to Mauritius while reportedly committing tens of billions of pounds to do so, placing the spotlight squarely on Diego Garcia, a strategically vital military installation jointly operated by the United States and the United Kingdom. For decades, Diego Garcia has been a central hub for Western military reach, supporting operations across the Indo-Pacific and Middle East, including major conflicts, counter-terror efforts, intelligence operations, and strategic deterrence, yet Britain now appears prepared to surrender sovereign control. The magnitude of this decision cannot be overstated, with one observer comparing it to the United States giving away Hawaii and paying another nation to accept it. This is not a case of reclaiming occupied land, as Mauritius has never exercised sovereignty over the islands, and claims that the territory is being returned have been labeled by legal scholars as misleading at best. The islands were separated from Mauritius prior to independence, governed independently, and have remained under British authority ever since. Yet the UK government maintains that this handover is unavoidable but necessary for whom, critics are asking, and at what price, as the situation has now escalated into a dramatic last-minute appeal directed not at Westminster but straight to Donald Trump, with the Chagosian government in exile urging him to step in and stop the agreement altogether. In a striking move, its First Minister, Ms. Lee Mandering, has sent a direct and urgent letter warning that the deal would not only abandon the Chagosian people, descendants of those forcibly removed decades ago, but also place both British and American security at risk by shifting sovereignty to Mauritius and granting it leverage over access, operations, and long-term decisions at Diego Garcia. That warning is where global concern intensifies, because Diego Garcia is not just another overseas facility, it is one of the West's most critical strategic assets, uniquely positioned to project power across multiple regions while offering unmatched security, discretion, and operational flexibility, having long supported advanced military capabilities and global logistics. Any dilution of control over that base is not a localized matter, but a serious issue with worldwide implications. The Chagosian letter goes further, warning that Mauritius maintains close political and economic relationships with China and Russia, raising serious concerns about outside influence creeping into decisions that directly impact Western military operations. And the alarm deepens with Mauritius's participation in the African Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone framework, which critics argue could introduce legal and diplomatic barriers to certain strategic activities involving nuclear assets. In real terms, this could allow future challenges, delays, or outright restrictions on Diego Garcia's role as a deterrence platform or operational launch point, not as a theoretical risk, but as a built-in vulnerability created by deliberate policy choices. At the same time, the voices of the Chagosian people themselves remain largely ignored, despite many having been forcibly displaced in the 1960s and 1970s and spending decades seeking recognition, restitution, and the right to return. Now, as their homeland becomes the subject of a historic geopolitical decision, they say they have been excluded entirely, with Mandering stating that many Chagosians want the islands to remain under British sovereignty because alignment with the UK, and by extension the United States, represents stability, security, and the strongest path forward. Instead, they see their homeland being negotiated away through a political and legal process carried out without their consent, prompting a direct and urgent appeal to pause the deal, and finally give the Chagosian people a voice. In a striking sign of how urgent the situation has become, Mandering even floats the idea that the Chagosian people would be willing to honor Donald Trump by naming an island after him should he succeed in stopping the transfer, a symbolic gesture perhaps, but one that underscores how high the stakes feel for those watching their homeland slip away, leaving a larger unanswered question as this story gains traction on both sides of the Atlantic. Why is Britain pursuing this at all? Mauritius did not force the issue, the Chagosian people did not ask for this outcome, the strategic argument weighs heavily against it, and the projected cost of roughly £30 billion is staggering, yet the government continues forward regardless. In the next phase of this debate, attention turns to the legal pressures, international opinions, and influential networks that critics argue are shaping the decision, raising concerns that ideology rather than national interest is driving one of the most controversial agreements Britain has ever contemplated. At its core, the dispute over the Chagos Islands is not simply about territory, but about a clash between international advisory rulings and what many see as the United Kingdom's sovereign interests, as claims advanced over time by Mauritius, despite the islands having been administered separately by Britain before Mauritian independence, have culminated in non-binding opinions from international bodies such as the International Court of Justice, which critics say are now being treated as political mandates rather than legal obligations. The ICJ's advisory opinion, while influential, carries no binding force, which makes the British government's decision to surrender sovereignty and commit billions to Mauritius raise a deeper and more troubling question: why override the expressed interests and wishes of the Chagosian people in favor of a largely symbolic international judgment, and whose priorities are really being served? Scrutiny of the figures surrounding Prime Minister Keir Starmer adds fuel to the controversy, as critics point to senior legal advisors with deep roots in international human rights circles who are accused of elevating global legal ideals above national strategy, including one confidant described as Starmer's closest ally and long embedded in networks that champion strict compliance with international rulings regardless of local or strategic consequences. These circles, made up of elite barristers, former human rights lawyers, and advisors connected to international courts and global advocacy groups, are where critics believe the intellectual case for relinquishing the islands was shaped, even given their immense strategic value. According to one senior parliamentary source speaking privately, these debates unfold in comfortable North London settings over fine wine and abstract legal theory, while the real-world implications for Diego Garcia and the Chagosian people are quietly set aside, and looming over it all is the staggering financial dimension, with Britain reportedly committing around £30 billion as part of the deal. A figure that has left many observers openly baffled. Why would Britain effectively pay another country to assume control of land that was never under its sovereignty in the first place? Critics argue this payment represents more than a legal arrangement, instead reflecting a broader shift toward governance driven by international considerations rather than strategic judgment, a move widely viewed as political rather than practical, especially as analysts warn of ripple effects from committing billions to an agreement with no clear domestic benefit while pressures such as housing shortages and strained public services continue to intensify, creating damaging optics that reinforce the perception that elite networks and international law are being prioritized over the welfare of ordinary citizens. At the center of the debate remains the voice of the Chagosian people themselves, displaced for decades, and now sidelined as their homeland is negotiated away to satisfy diplomatic goals and international legal opinion, despite repeated statements from Mislay Mandaring, the First Minister of the Chagosian government in exile, emphasizing that those he represents wish to remain aligned with the United Kingdom for reasons grounded in history, security, and stable governance. Yet the government appears intent on moving forward regardless, a stance critics view as an ideological commitment to global frameworks that elevates legal symbolism and diplomatic image above the concrete realities of sovereignty, national security, and accountability to the people most directly affected. Political observers argue this agreement goes far beyond law or money and amounts to a deliberate political gamble, with the UK seemingly willing to trade strategic responsibility for international approval by signaling compliance with global legal norms and advisory opinions, even as it sidelines the Chagosians and commits billions to Mauritius at the risk of domestic backlash and declining public trust. As one former senior diplomat bluntly put it, the British establishment appears more focused on looking virtuous on the world stage than acting responsibly in matters of security. That calculation carries serious consequences, especially for the United States, which has deep strategic investment in Diego Garcia, where defense officials have reportedly raised concerns and described the proposed handover as strategically unsound, warning that errors could disrupt military operations, intelligence cooperation, and broader Indo-Pacific posture. Ultimately, this controversy represents a direct clash between abstract international legal ideals and hard strategic reality, where advisory opinions and diplomatic symbolism collide with Diego Garcia's role as a critical pillar of Western security. Political observers argue this agreement goes far beyond law or money and amounts to a deliberate political gamble, with the UK seemingly willing to trade strategic responsibility for international approval by signaling compliance with global legal norms and advisory opinions, even as it sidelines the Chagosians and commits billions to Mauritius at the risk of domestic backlash and declining public trust. As one former senior diplomat bluntly put it, the British establishment appears more focused on looking virtuous on the world stage than acting responsibly in matters of security. That calculation carries serious consequences, especially for the United States, which has deep strategic investment in Diego Garcia, where defense officials have reportedly raised concerns and described the proposed handover as strategically unsound, warning that errors could disrupt military operations, intelligence cooperation, and broader Indo-Pacific posture. Ultimately, this controversy represents a direct clash between abstract international legal ideals and hard strategic reality, where advisory opinions and diplomatic symbolism collide with Diego Garcia's role as a critical pillar of Western security, Chagosian historical grievances, billions in public funds, and intensifying competition in the Indo-Pacific all converge here. As critics argue, the government is elevating moral or legal symbolism over practical judgment, a choice that could carry serious long-term consequences, because granting Mauritius sovereignty is not merely a transfer of territory, but a handover of authority over basing decisions, access approvals, and potentially sensitive military operations, injecting uncertainty into an environment that has always depended on stability and absolute control. And while much of the discussion has focused on strategy and legality, the human dimension, displacement, exile, and a deep sense of betrayal, remains an unavoidable and unresolved part of this unfolding decision.